Good day and welcome to this video. In this video we're going to do how to start by modeling in your class structures, meaning how to put in columns, beams, and then just a quick end plate or two. Further also a bracing or two with the gusset included with base plates. I'm going to show how to do all of those quickly. This is just for beginners, a quick guide to start off with your class structures. So let's start off. First of all, go to your steel tab. Now, in a previous video, I already set up my grid lines. Feel free to go watch the video on my YouTube channel, Detailer's Guide. Now, if you want to, this is just quickly, you can pause the video just to quickly see what I put up as my grid lines, and then you can just continue using those properties as well. Now, let's start off by firstly creating a column. Now, if you click once on the column, nothing will happen, but you can still press and press in a column. So I'm just going to delete that. Now, view the properties. You have two ways. You can either double click on the column and the properties will pop up on the right hand side. You can hold in the shift key and click on the column itself and the properties will pop up on the right hand side. And the final way is if you click once on it, you can choose the gear icon and the properties will pop up on the right hand side. So now, first of all, I'm going to put in just quickly small m with a capital C, which means it's a member and it is a column. Now, again, you can put in well, you want to put it in. You can put in a CM. You can put it in whatever you need to put it in as. Next up, we're going to choose our profile size. Now, I'm just going to close. Now, this is the UC for universal columns. You can go to UV now and select, for instance, a 406 by 140. That's overkill, actually. So I'm just going to go ahead with the 356. Now, you can change the color of it by choosing the drop-down menu and selecting a color that you prefer. I'm just going to choose 2, for instance. And now, you already know that our total height of this entire platform should be 4.5 meters. So I'm going to change the 6,000 millimeter to 4,500 to get it automatically to the correct height. Now, I'm going to place it in, and there we go. Now, if I click on it, it will show that it's currently on a 4.5 meters. Now, a few things that you need to know. You can change the height of any item, column, you can change the length of any beam, etc. Now, to do so, you have more than one way of doing this. For the column, you can just edit out this part right here, which means if I want it at 5 meters, I can just type in 5,000 and it will extend. If I want it to be 100 millimeters from the bottom floor, or for instance, let's say total height should be 4.5, but column starts at the second floor, which is 2,000. I can just type in 2,000. So now it will lift up by 2,000, and this is where my first floor go to the second floor. So it's 2 meters from the ground floor. Just to show you, if I click on the node, it will go 2 meters down. Now this is one way of editing out your column heights. The next one is by just clicking on the column. You click on the node once with your left mouse button, right click, choose move, and you choose the point you want to move it toward. So for instance, if you push it to the midpoint, the column will become a slanted column. So I'm going to push Control Z just to undo that, because I don't want that. You can even choose the icon and choose move special linear and say, for instance, in the Z axis upwards, we want it 100 millimeters from the ground. If I choose move, it will move upwards. You can do it with the X and Y direction as well. So you can either just click and hold onto the node as well, move it upwards. That's even possible. So there are different ways of moving it. Another way of moving the column in height is by clicking on the column once with your left mouse button, hovering over this blue line, and clicking on this value right here. Now, this means is from the bottom, you can see where that icon is. It means from the bottom, I want it to go upwards by 3,500. So now, in total, what will happen is the top, this top part will drop down by a meter if I press enter. So I'm going to press enter, and it dropped. So my total height is 3.5. Now, let's say I'm just going to press Control Z again, just to undo. Let's say I want to lift it from the bottom upwards now. From this point, I'm going to say it should be 2.5 meters. So it is from the second floor to the first floor. If I press enter, as you can see, it lifted up to the first floor. I'm going to press Ctrl Z again just to undo. And the last function means that it's from the midpoint, 4.5 meters. Now the half of 4.5 is 2.25. It means that it goes upwards by 2.25 and 2.25. Now if I change this, for instance, to 3,000, what will happen is now it will decrease in both directions. So watch closely. If I press enter, it will now decrease in both directions. There we go. So this is different ways of manipulating a column or even a beam's length and height. Right, so now we've got our column in. However, this is not the correct orientation I want. I want to be able, if I'm standing right here and I'm looking at grid 23, I want to see the web. So to do that, I'm going to change my properties over here. Now, this is how the properties work. The first one says middle. That means it will either move to the sides. Now, let's go with down, for instance. You can see it moved. If I say up, it will go to this part will be where the node is, as you can see. So now it's at the start of my grid line. Down will be at the start of the grid line as well, but opposite side. Now I'm going to go with preferably middle. Now the other one that mentions horizontal means now it will move towards, let's see, grid line A1. So just to middle. So if I choose to go to the left hand side, now it will move towards A1, as you can see. So the node stays in the same place. Now, even if you add values, let's add 2000 for instance. This means now it will move from the node where it is currently. That means at this point right here will be 2000 meters from there. So I'm going to press modify, and as you can see, it moved up. Now, to show you this, I'm going to choose, you don't have to draw with me right now. I'm going to choose a construction line, and I'm going to place my construction line in. There we go. So there's my construction line. I'm just going to add nearest selection intersection so I can move this line. So I'm going to choose my construction line, and I'm going to move it by 2000. Right? And as you can see now, it touches exactly at that point of my column. So if I place it now to, again, the middle part will be where the construction line is. So I'm just going to change this back to 0, modify it, delete this. There we go. So now that's how you're going to manipulate your basic positions of your column. Now to rotate your column, you change the front to top, and it will rotate at a 90 degree. If you want it at 45 degrees, you can just type in 45. And there we go. Have a 45 degree column. You can change it into anything you wish, 30, etc. So it doesn't really matter. Right, so I'm going to keep it at that. So there we go. We currently have the column set up as I wanted. Now, we created views in our previous video. I'm just going to load up. In this case, I want to load up grid B1, for instance. So let's swap this back front, right? Because let's say I want to stand here and look at and see it like this. So I'm going to say Control I. Press that, it will open up this tab, and we're on grid line B1. So I'm going to just throw it over to the side, and there we go. So it's currently at the top height that we wanted, the required height. So now I'm going to choose my column. I can copy it over, or before I do that, I'm going to go use my window 3D view back, and we're going to place in the very first component that we need, which is a base plate. Now again, the videos are just on how to use class structures and not on the unit standards or any standard structural standards. So take note that this video will not probably be correct values of how it should be done. Right, so I'm going to choose now, I'm just going to type in base because I love to use a 1042. So I'm going to double click on it and my properties will pop up. This part shows how far the column will lift up from our base plate. We're not going to edit that. We're not going to edit anything on this view right here, right now. Now we can say how thick we want the base plate. I'm going to make it 12, for instance. I'm not going to fill in any other values or anything else right now. according to your company, you have to use your own standards that they want. They have their own standard. Or if you want to learn more about this, again, please visit the company mentioned in my first introduction video. We'll be able to assist you in training. Right, so now, parameters very rarely used, so we're going over to the general. Now, general is how the degree and so on that you're sloping of your base plate. Now, when is this used? Whenever you use your column might be placed on a sloped floor, or even against a wall that is sloped, or something like that. Now, this part, that's the color of your base plate. Now, currently it's on 99, which means it's a gray color. You'll see shortly as soon as we put it in. Now, the anchor rods, I prefer to put in if we have anchor rods, and also the bolts, etc. Now, for now, we're just going to go with grout. So I'm going to choose grout above. You can choose the thickness. I'm just going to go with 25. Extra plates you can add if you wish to. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm not going to set in any the item right now. This is, again, you can do this on your own. Now, bolts. Let's go with the size. Let's go with 36, for instance, and we choose. Let's just go with 4.8, because that is not really 36 size. Again, correct standards. Now we're just going to say we need 2 bolts on each side. I'm not going to put in any other values right now, but what this means is, for instance, let's make this 250. Let's make this 250 by 250, 50 by 50, and 50. What this means is that the bolt spacing between the bolts will be 250, and the plate will end with a total of 15 millimeters in both directions here. This means 250 over a 50 and a 50, for instance. So I'm pressing apply. And how this works is I click first on my column and then where I want it to be. So if I want it on the ground floor, I'm going to click on grid line, for instance, now. So what's going to happen now, it's just going to render it, and there you got it. This is not even close to correct, but okay. So now what it means is you can see that the grid line is below the ground. So this is where your column will be placed. All right, so there we go. Now let's say we want to change a bit. So we say 200 by 200, because what it currently means is if I choose my measuring tool, it will be from midpoint to midpoint to 50. Now with my new value, and I press modify, you can see that the plate was edited, and that is how we determine it. So let's make it 300 by 300, for instance. So now we have an even bigger base plate. Now this is not correct. The holes are too big and the edges is wrong, everything. But this is how you manipulate your base plate. So now let's go to our anchor rods, for instance, and we're going to add a few anchor rods. So first off, let's choose an anchor rod. Now we have 36 hole, so let's go ahead and say a rod. 30 will be just fine. We're going to say modify. So have that item. Do we want nuts? No, nothing else right here. Now we have to start adding items right here. So what we do is we're going to choose and say yes. This is a nut pot, so we're going to say yes on all the item spots. This is a washer. Do we want a washer? Yes, please. So we're going to check what we need. So we have now washers and nuts. So let's start going on. Remember, we have to say that this is a base plate of anchor rods. Now if we just modify, start adding what we just added. So if I say no to this one, for instance, you can see that one is disappearing. If we say no to this one, for instance, it will be gone as well. So now you can add where you want it. So if I say yes here, it will be at the bottom part. There it starts showing. So you can just manipulate it. Yes, 2 nuts, for instance, and we say modify. Now we have 2 nuts. And we say, listen, this should be at least 100. So now it extends it. So I'm just going to say this as default. I'm going to modify it, and I'm going to keep it as is right now. This is what I want. I'm going to say apply. No need to really, but okay. Now if you press redraw, it will remove the welding marks. However, if you press Ctrl 1 and then Shift 1, you go into complete wireframe, you'll see this green cone. Now this green cone is basically, if you double click on it, it will open up the properties that you just loaded in. Right. Now, this will go away in 2 ways. The first way, if you just don't want, if you want to be able to still edit it out, let's go, click on the background, choose display, and you turn off component symbols and you modify it, and you'll see that it's now gone. But if you wanted to reappear, you have one of two ways. You can either just delete, Control Z to undo, and will reappear, or you can just go back to settings that you've just set and do what you want to do there. Now, if you want to use this, but you want to manipulate a few things, for instance, these nuts are just too big. Now, the problem is, if you go to our anchor rods, it doesn't really always provide you with everything you need. But let's say, okay, this one will be able, let's say 25, and you'll see that your nuts just decrease in heights, as you can see. So you can actually do it over here. It doesn't really, oh, that was just too much. Just 25, please. Okay. So now the nut, if I go with this, the washer, there's a 10 millimeter or rather 2 millimeter, and there's your 2 millimeter washer. So there we go. But now let's say you want to edit something else that you want to change or so. You can do, and you don't have the function, you can't figure it out on this right here. What you can do is you can just click on it, right click and say explode component. Now if you do this, you can now manipulate each part within it. Undo. Now you can even manipulate it by clicking on the select objects and component. You can manipulate items within it, but remember that as soon as you delete it and undo, it will retake its previous properties and everything you've done will be lost. So I'm happy with what we've got. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say copy. I'm going to click on my column. I'm going to say copy it over this side right here. Now currently it's just copying the column, as you can see, but as soon as I press on that part, it will put in my base plate automatically. And there we go. So now we have the columns. Next up, we're going to add a beam. So let's start. Go back to your steel bar and choose beam. Again, hold in shift and click on it and the properties will pop up. Now again, you can add this as you see fit, for instance, keep it as beam. And we're going to choose a small beam. This is going to go with a 254 beam. Right? And what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to show you how these properties work right here. So I'm going to click on the endpoint and on the endpoint, and automatically sets in the beam that I just created, but it overlaps. But again, it will change pretty soon. You'll see how. Now, this is how the following works. You have your steel grade, you have your color. So again, you can change the color. Let's change it to blue, for instance. There we go. We have blue. This is your numbering setting, so you can change it as you see fit. Preferably keep this as 1. Do not change it to 0, or preferably don't change that because sometimes it messes around with your numbering. So next up is you can actually change this location the same. So if you go to right, it will move on the side over here. If you choose left, it will move same as the column. And the same goes for this. If you say front, it will lift up now, so that the node is at the bottom now. So again, if you put in values, the same will happen. So I'm going to keep it at behind. Now, remember, when putting in beams, this is important for your drawing specifications and to make it your life just easier. Just ensure that always a beam is shown as on top, because this means this is the top part. Like literally, this is the top part. If that's not the case, your drawings will be very, very disorientated and sometimes very difficult to detail. Right. So now, what the other functions are, these functions right here, what it means is, if you click on it, this is the yellow node. So from a yellow node, if I say I wanted, for instance, 12, it means 12 millimeters backwards, as you can see. So it shortens it. If I say negative 12, it will lengthen it. All right, so I'm going to change this back to 0. And the same goes for the other side, but opposite. Meaning, if I say 12, it will extend by 12. And if I say negative 12, it will shorten by 12. All right. So this is basically on those items right here. Now, what happens here is, let me show you quickly. If we say 20 in this one, it's on the other side, sorry. What it does is it starts to shift it because it's in a Y direction. If I say negative 20, it will shift it to the other side. You can see. So that's the other function. Now the Z function, you can already know what this means. It's just going to lower. So let's say 25. This one is, again, it will go up on this side. On the other side, it will be minus, say minus here. It will be here, still exactly where the node needs to be. So To be honest, that's just the quick way of editing, or you can just move your nodes. To be honest, you click on a node, you hold it in, you move it to where you want it, or you can just do it the same way as I showed you before by just highlighting your node. What I did here, I hold in Alt and then I highlight over it. If you just highlight over it, nothing will happen. You have to hold in Alt and then you can choose Move, and you can move it wherever you want to move it, as you can see, as explained with the columns. Now, everything else, there we go. Now we have what we need. We have a beam to a column. Now we want to connect it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my components again. And the best one to use is 144 plate. So now you can click on your column and click on your beam. And there we go. We have a column. It's a predefined one that they just put in. Now, Tekla has preloaded settings on some items. So if you want 2 bolts spacing at 70 or bolts at the 90 cross center, you can just load it. You select it, you load it, modify it. It will change, as you can see. Well, it even changed. But now let's say we want 2 by 70 by 70, which means it will go 70 down from each other and 70 cross centers. We're going to load it, and now you can see a difference. Here we go. So now it's even smaller. So you can either load these items in as you see fit. Here's, for instance, 3, which means it's 90 over each other, 70 downwards. So I loaded it. I'm going to modify it. There we go. So if I choose my edit bar and I choose a measuring tool and I choose the midpoint of this bolt to the midpoint of this bolt, press it over here, 90 cross centers. So this is how this is done. Now, you can choose you want a 2 millimeter gap, 2, 5, 8, doesn't really matter. You can say this part just determines from the top of your beam to where the plate should go down, where it should start. So I'm going to say, for instance, 10. If I say modify, it will be 10 millimeters. If I want to have a complete 6 or even 0, so it will be flush with that item. And the same for the bottom part. So there we go. So you can do it like that. Now, it has an 8. I want to go, for instance, with 10. You can now edit the breadth of it, which means instead of the current, let's choose from this point to this point. The default one is 150 now on this spot. Let's make it 170, for instance, just to show you quickly. And if I press modify, it will extend. The height means that you can now change how far it goes. But as long as you have values placed here, no matter what you do, you can put in 300, for instance. Nothing. Okay, there we go. I was wrong. So you have extension of your so if you add a value here, say 150, it will shorten. You can see, so it will become the plate specifications. So again, as you see, please or ask your company needs it. Now again, this part right here is the color. So if I make it 1, for instance, it will become a gray color. If I make it a 4, it will be blue like my beam. If I make it 2, it will be like my column, because our column is a color of 2. If I make it 3, for instance, it will be green. So you can change the color if you wish to. It doesn't matter. That's up to you. Now the haunch, all this does is if your plate extends beyond your beam, it will put in a plate and you can start by adding values. We don't need it. Notching is if it goes into another beam, and we need it right now. And all of these standards, or how much this should be, and it's not part of my video and my training. I'm only showing you how the detail works. Now, bolts. Bolting currently is set up to their standards. You can choose that. You can even make it in the middle, make the 0, for instance, and you'll see that it moved directly in the middle. You can chop and change it as you see fit. Now, what this means is the same as your base plate. Size of the bolt, grade of the bolt, the tolerance of the bolt should be threaded, yes or no. And then this part is now completely useless because we made it flush with our glue. Now, the reason it didn't pick up is because it takes precedence over your bolting. Now, if you change this and you go back to your bolt tab, 35. Now, if I say modify, you'll see that suddenly it changes. So the preference is, firstly, picture, So let's make this 0, 0. There we go, as you can see. So then this renders as a second preference, which means if you move that item, it will go in. And the same goes with the plate. If you have a certain height, let's make it 300 for instance. If you have a certain height and you remove 0 by 0, just remove those, now it will move directly in the middle, as you can see. But even if you have 35, it takes preference over on this part. As soon as you remove this, this will take effect again, or bolt. So just take as a reminder that your bolting does not take preferences. This is your last preference values after your and your plates tab. This part means the bolt spacing between each other is 70 by 70. Spacing as shown, 90. Now, this part means from this part to this part directly from the hole center to the edge of your plate is 30. So you can manipulate this as you see fit, and you can even make it 50. But remember, if you change this to 150, it will take preference. So again, your plate tab take preference over your bolting tab. Right, so now we have our setting. I'm just going to go back to what Hitler had it on. I'm not agreeing quite with that one, but okay. So now we have our connection in. So we want to place the same connection over here. So what you have to do now is you just have to say apply. If you apply this, it means if I choose this function, I place it in, it will be exactly the same. Now, the wonders of Tekla is that if you choose this part, I'm going to go back to my grid B, for instance. This is my beam. I'm going to press Control 2 to show it is. If I press Shift 1, you can see the beam. Go back to Shift 4 and Control 4. Now, if I go ahead, we know that this distance is 2.5 meters. So I'm going to go back to my 3D view. I'm going to say copy special. You can do it ways. You can either say copy special linear and choose negative 2,500. Reason is it looks upwards, so if you say negative, it's going to copy it downwards in the opposite direction. So you can choose this way and say copy, and we'll add the beam along with your plates. Another way of doing this is by clicking on your beam once, control your right click and say copy, and now you can choose any part, doesn't really matter, any part on your column. Make sure you click on the same line. Do not you see I clicked it on this line. Do not go over to this line, because then your beam will be out of sync. It will no longer be in line. So I'm going to choose here. I'm not going to click now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the value of 2,500 on my numpad and press enter. Once I've done that, beam and end plate will appear. Right, so now we can select all of this, just copy it over to this part right here. But now here's where it gets interesting. I want this part right here between these two columns to be just a beam, one at the top. So I'm going to choose this one. I'm going to say copy special rotate. The reason is if I choose that and I choose the midpoint of my column, I say 90 degrees. Now what this means is it's going to rotate 90 degrees. There we go. So it rotated, but it transferred my connection as well. But now I have to say, click on it, apply, just to make sure it's still active. Choose my end plate function, column, beam, and it shortens it automatically as my specs. So now we have that. I can copy it, but I'm not going to copy it now. The reason is I first want to complete this part. Now I've shown you how to create views. I press Control P just to get to the plan view now. You'll see the reason why. Now we've seen that we can use grid by just creating the views and pressing Control I, go back to grid 1B, is the beam, and you can start working. Right? This is the one method of doing it. Another way of creating a view is to go to your 3D view, for instance, choose your view tab, choose new view using 2 points, and now I'm going to start at the bottom. The reason is your starting point, you can see that if I go downwards, I look that way. If I go upwards, I'm looking at it from this point, and that's what I want. So I'm going to press it, and if I click on the background once with my left button, Control P, it will now go to plan view, or the plan view of the view. So there we go. Now we have what we want. We're going to place in, go back to Steel tab. We're going to place in a bracing with a gusset, and then we are done with what we're doing here. So choose beam again. Now the drop down is polybeam, curve beam, twin beam, all of those, but again, that's for another video. I'm just going to choose beam. I'm going to choose my here, and what we're going to do is we're going to choose, let's go to our old profiles, or old angles, and we're going to use a 70 by 70 by 10 for instance. Change the color to 6 for a yellow color, and you can name this whatever you want to name it. So for instance, FB or CB or whatever, doesn't really matter. It's again your company preferences. I'm just going to say this is a brace. Right, so there we go. The same applies to it as a normal beam function again. So now I'm going to choose my starting point, the midpoint, which is a triangle shape, and again back here. But now this is where you have to change these items. So I'm going to highlight both of them, and firstly I want to see the lip, yes, but I don't want it to be on the bottom. I want it at the top. So now I have to change these functions. Now for bracing you can do this. It won't affect your detailing much. I'm going to say front, for instance, didn't work. Go to back, and so you play back is the one I want. But I also want it in the middle, so I want it in the middle. There we go. Now you can now move, but I want my gusset to be the center point, so I'm going to say to the right, and I'm going to add 5 millimeters so that my middle of my gusset, which is 10 thick, will be in the middle of my beam. Now again, do it as you see fit. If you want this to be flush, your choice. Do as your company requests. So now we're going to start. Again, choose your components and type in the number 11 for a bolted gusset. So I'm going to double click on it because now I want to set up settings. Now, for instance, again, you change these to your specifications or your requirements, what you wanted. This means is, I'm going to show you, let's keep it at 10. I'm going to show you what it does. I'm going to apply this and just put one in. So what it does, I'm going to explain how you put it in, don't worry, just watch the video just here quickly, is it adds 10 millimeter, 10 millimeter. If I remove these 10 millimeters, oh, that was not correct, it should be 20. It now removes it. Right, so that's what this part does. This is the clearance between them, doesn't really matter. You can use a 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, doesn't matter. Again, play around with it. Now the gusset is 10 thick, yes, I'm happy with that. Now what this does is the breadth, we don't really do this. This is if you want to use a L profile, but again, very rarely used. The L profile is basically the gusset becomes a bolted connection to your column and no longer welded. Now, again, the color, you can change it as you see fit, doesn't really matter what you want. Alright, so now let's start. The stiffness doesn't really use all this. Go to your bracing bolt 1. Now just make sure that this setting is the same as this one and this one. So whatever you change here, you have to change in those 3 as well. I'm going to go with, for instance, 50 by 100 by 50, for instance. Go with an M16 CSK. Oh, no, not CSK. That's not going to work at all. Right, so now we do the same with this part. So it's 50 by 100 by 50, 16. And the same for bracing bolt number 3, 50 by 100 by 50, 16, 4.8. Did I do it with bracing bolt 2? No. Right, now, again, design, the general, change color and rotations if needed. Now I've set up what I want. So I'm going to say apply. I'm going to choose my bolt function, choose my column first, meaning the main part, always the main part, meaning the part that the gusset welds to. Then you choose the part that wants to be bolted to it. So if it's only one, you just click on the column first, then on the brace, and you press the middle button on your mouse and we'll add in. Now this is very weirdly shaped, so to change it, just double click on the green cone and you can now change this part. You can keep it on that part, which is fine, or you can say, listen, it shouldn't even connect to the base plate, and you can say modify, and now you can go to your gusset function, and instead of 100 you can say 10, for instance, which will now make it a 10 millimeter over here. If I make it 0, we'll go, okay, make it just 1, it will be very, very sharp, but only 1 millimeter over here. Or you can make it 10, whichever you want to, or 20, so it will go 20 millimeters and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to go back to 10, for instance, and there we have a connection to our column. I'm going to say apply, and what I can do now is I can choose again the connection to the column to the bracing middle button, and here is you choose your beam, choose either one of these two. So first this bolt brace, then this brace, and then middle button, and we'll shape it. Now, okay, so here's a little mistake. This is what happens if your settings is not the same. I made it 10 instead of 100. Choose 100. Now it is basically squared. Go to grid B. Basically, it is completely squared. If I press Control 2, this is the shape of my gusset. So Control 4 again. Here we go. So now I've placed in the bracings, and now we just want it on the other side. So I'm going to go back to my 3D view, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold in the function Alt, click on my beam, so it will select everything welded to this part as well. You can hold in Shift, Alt, and select your two braces as well. Or another way is just by selecting the main parts, holding in Shift, or you can just highlight it like this. Either way. Now, I want to have it the same on this side, but still the lip be outside. Now, the problem is if you just choose copy, the lip will be inside, and I don't want it like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to highlight it again, and I'm going to say copy special mirror. I'm going to choose the midpoint to my other part's midpoint. Make sure that this reads either 90 or 180. You know it's correct. I'm going to say copy. As soon as I copy it, the lip will be on the outside, as you can see. There we go. Right, it's probably a bit late in the video, but I'm going to explain to you how I rotate once more. You have more than one way. You can either press Control R, choose your point, hold in the Control button with the middle button, and you rotate. Choose interrupt, or you can just go to a point that you want to rotate around. Let's say this spot right here. Now, if I just rotate, it will rotate weird, as you can see, because this is the point. So where my mouse is shown, so right there, I'm going to hold Control Shift and then the middle button. I'm going to rotate, and it chooses that point as my rotation part. And now I can just rotate around that by holding in Control and the middle button to rotate. Right, so there we go. There we've placed in bracing beams and columns with their connections. So this is just a quick basic on how to work on a model of